I think most people know the story of what happened on Tisha B'Av, or in the warm-up, in the lead-up to Tisha B'Av. The short version, if you will, the short part of the story is that the prophets, in Hebrew the Nevi'im, the prophets predicted that if the people keep on carrying on the way they are carrying on, that the temple would be destroyed and the people would be exiled. The rest of the story is that the people kept on carrying on. And the temple was destroyed and the people were exiled. I have a question for you. It's a question that's very personal for me because I think of myself as something of a wannabe prophet. How could the story have ended differently? The story has happened over and over again in our history. How could the story have ended differently? And if you want to put it in very practical terms, how could the story today end differently? The same prophecies and the same people carrying on and the same story.
Stop carrying on.
So the prophet said, stop carrying on. And it did not change anything. Anything. I remember about 35 years ago, our two older sons were 6 and 8 at the time. And there was we were living in America still, and it was the first bar mitzvah in my parents' family. The first bar mitzvah, my oldest sister, her oldest son was becoming a bar mitzvah, and so I felt that I was going to come to Israel to celebrate the bar mitzvah together with the family. The rest of my family was already living here. So that was the plan. But I had a stopover in London. I went to my dear friends to stay over, dear friends that I've known from forever. And once I'm in London already, so I took the boys to see the crown jewels. The crown jewels are the crown, the scepter. Let me tell you what a scepter is. A scepter is, in Hebrew they call it a sharvit. The scepter of the monarch, it's not like in America. In America, everything just has the symbol of the President of the United States. It's not unique to any particular king, because it's just a president. So it's just a symbol of the president. And they all are just the same because it doesn't change. In England, there's a different and separate one for every king. Has his own crown jewels. You don't just reuse the ones from the previous one. It's a separate one. And so we're looking from one to the next, magnificent. And we get to one scepter, one sharvit, one staff, if you will. And it says, the box is empty. The box is empty. And instead, there's a sign that says, in use. In use. So I took my boys over to one of the beef eaters There are guards that are there. They call them beefeaters. I went over to one of the beefeaters and I said, could you explain to my sons what that means, that this scepter is in use? So he said that there's a duchan, a bima. There's a platform in the House of Lords. And if the scepter of the king is not present, nothing that they do or say is binding. No rule, nothing that they paskin in the House of Lords, nothing that they say or do has any meaning unless the scepter of the king is on the duchan, is on this bima, on this platform. So I saw a golden opportunity. And I turned to the beefeater in front of my boys, and I said, oh, so in the House of Lords, do they act as though they're in the presence of the scepter of the king? So he didn't want to laugh too hard. And he said, no. So I said, and they carry on over there. It's almost competes with the Knesset. I mean, it's absolutely a house of monkeys. So they, so I said in front of the boys, I said, if they're in front of the scepter of the king, why is it that they don't act like they're in the presence of the scepter of the king? So the beefeater says, they've gotten used to it. They've gotten used to it. Doesn't move them anymore. They've gotten used to it. So I turned to my two little boys and I said, what does the king have to do? I didn't want to tell them that there's no king, there's a queen. They don't need to get involved in the details. Who cares? Right? What does the king need to do that they should act like they're in the presence of the scepter of the king? And I let the two of them go at it. And one of them said he needs to walk in there and tell them, tell them straight. The other one says, if he comes in and tells them, it's worthless. And the other one says, got to give them an onesh. It's got to punish them. The other one says, it's not going to help. They'll remember it for a few weeks. They'll forget it. And I let them go at it. And they were done finally. And they came back to me and they said, Abba, there's nothing that the king can do. If they don't decide that they're going to act like they're in the presence of the scepter of the king, there's nothing the king can do. That was the conclusion that they came to, which of course is the correct conclusion. And that is how it ended. That there's nothing the king can do to get the people to act as though they're in the presence of the king. Fast forward Tisha B'Av. The Beis HaMikdash, it's a temple, the home, if you will, of the presence of the Almighty in this world. And people are living and acting around the temple, not even talking about Tel Aviv. And they're carrying on. What can the king do? So I turn it to you and I ask, what could the king do? How could the story end differently? So I will tell you something that the king, the Almighty King, can do that the King of England can't do. And that is to shake up the whole world. Shake up the whole world. Before he sent the World War, what did he do in America to shake up the world? He sent what's called the stock crash that created the Great Depression to shake up the world. We had, probably in more recent memory, in 2008 there was a crash again in America, this time surrounding primarily the real estate market in 2008. When that didn't do enough, it was a pandemic. What was the point of the pandemic? To shake up the world, to disrupt, to get everybody to stop and think for a moment. Wait a second, it's not business as usual. He means this. He means it. He's disrupting the world so that we will take him seriously. And more recently, he disrupted the entire world politically, using October 7th as the opening ceremony of disrupting the world completely, upside down. There isn't a country in the world today that is able to predict what the next day is going to look like. Puts the UK on the brink of civil war, just all around the Jews, of course, surrounding the disruption, so that we'll understand, so that we'll get the message. The difficulty is that there are people who still listen to the news without hearing Hashem. Hashem is speaking through the daily events in our lives. And people still listen to the news as though the newscasters have something to say about it. Disruption is meant to free us up from our previous thought patterns. That is the point of disruption. Disruption is meant to unhinge us from that which we're stuck in. That's what disruption does. Disruption is not bad news. Disruption is simply an opportunity to shake loose from the things that are repetitious patterns. Disruption is sometimes challenging. It's hard to organize your day when there's a lot of disruption going on. It's hard to organize an economy when there's a lot of disruption going on. But disruption is there for a purpose. Disruption is not meant to be ignored. Disruption is there so that we will stop to pause and say, what is Hashem saying? So I'll give you a secret. If you find yourself blaming or getting angry or strategizing around any disruption, you're doing exactly the same thing that they did before the destruction of the temple. I'll say that again. If when there's a disruption in the world and you find yourself getting frustrated or angry, you find yourself blaming, or you find yourself strategizing for who should do what in order to change the situation, you are heading exactly to where the temple was destroyed. And when you read the news or you listen to general conversation, you will always hear them either getting frustrated or angry, blaming someone, or strategizing for what they need to do to make it better. Cruising right into the same story every time. It has gotten so repetitious that it's almost like its history has a stutter. Just keeps on repeating the same thing over and over again. So the first thing that you can do to move forward from what seems to be an impossible pattern of repetition is to avoid at all costs anger, frustration, blaming, or strategizing. This one's got to do this, and this one's got to do that, and if that one would only do that, and if this one would only speak up and say this, and if this one would only stop doing this, and if this one would only start doing this, and if... Total, but it's not just a waste of time. If it would just be a waste of time, so just add it to the list of time wasters. It's not just a waste of time. It predicts that nothing is going to change and that we will not get the message that the disruption is meant to give us. So that's a change that the Almighty has at his disposal that the King of England does not. Cannot create a worldwide disruption. Remember the old joke about the two old Jewish businessmen sitting on the boardwalk in Florida. Hadn't seen each other for many, many years. Yankel, how's it going? Haven't seen you in years. What brings you here? So, well, there was a fire at the factory. And until the insurance rebuilds it, fix it back up, takes some time. So I figured I would come down here and relax a little bit on the boardwalk. What about you? Oh, yeah, schlechte Mazel. It's a hurricane. Also, wiped out the business. And also, look at that. Until the insurance rebuilds the building. Takes time. So I figured I'd come down here to Florida, relax a little bit. There's a long pause. And the uncle turns back to his friend. He says, tell me, how do you start a hurricane? So there are things that the King of England can start, but one of them is not worldwide disruption. He can't start a pandemic. Maybe the Chinese started the pandemic, I don't know. But he can't start a pandemic, and he can't start worldwide disruption. But I would like to leave you with this food for thought. And that is, what was the prophet supposed to do that he didn't do? And the answer is, I don't know that there's anything that the prophet could have done. He did his job. He shared the message. Don't know that there's anything that he could have done differently. But I do know that there's something that we can do differently. We can readjust our relationship to disruption. Stop looking at disruption as a problem that needs to be solved. Disruption is not a problem that needs to be solved. It is a message that needs to be heard. That's a very different orientation to disruption. I don't know how much more disruption Israeli society needs to hear. It's a society that is utterly and absolutely disrupted, where nothing runs in an orderly way. Nothing. Not the judicial system, military system, political system. Nothing. Utterly and absolutely disrupted. So, that's because this one, and that's because this one. We're back to blaming, getting angry, or strategizing. Guess what? You never hear the message that way. Never. So you have some choices to make. How many people are hearing those choices? I don't know, but I will tell you that there are more people learning Torah today than there have ever been in the history of the Jewish people. There are more people coming back to traditional observance than there ever have been in the history of the Jewish people. There is more tzedakah being given today than there ever has been given in the history of the Jewish people. There was a campaign 3 weeks ago in America to replace the funds that this quote-unquote government is withholding from the yeshiva world. They raised over $100 million in 4 days. And I'm not talking about money that's sitting under a mattress somewhere. These are people with hard-earned money who are committing to millions of dollars for the yeshiva world. In the span of 4 days, there were commitments to close to $100 million. The goal was $107 million. I guess they left a little bit for the small people to take care of. So the parts are in place. The pieces of the puzzle are in place. Torah learning is going on. The quote-unquote government is collapsing. The tzedakah is happening. There is a tremendous movement in the direction of upgrading our relationship with Hashem. What we need to do is to affirm we will not view disruptions as bad news. Disruptions may be somewhat uncomfortable or difficult, but they are good news because they unsettle us and they force us to review the systems that we've been using. I think it was Einstein who said, don't try to get a different outcome using the same experiment. If you don't do something different, don't expect a different outcome. And so disruption is an opportunity for us to think about a different way of approaching our relationship with Hashem. A relationship with Hashem cannot be like it is in the non-Jewish world. In the non-Jewish world, they live their lives and they have their religion. They do their religion as necessary, whatever it is that they need to do, they do their religion and they live their lives. Hashem does not want a relationship with His people like a religion. We're not a religion. We are a life. Hashem gave us life in order to live it as a Jew. He didn't give us life so that we would live, and when we have a chance, you should do the Jewish things. That's the way the non-Jewish world approaches their religion. I would tell you that there's one exception. It's a little bit scary. The one exception is the fanatical Arab world. That's where you'll see the exception. That's what we're being shown. That's what it looks like to think day and night about how to kill Jews. Day and night. Nothing else interrupts their thinking. Nothing. They think about it when they're eating, when they're sleeping, when they're drinking, when they're everything. They're only thinking about one thing: how to kill Jews. That's how we're supposed to be in our relationship with Hashem. 24/7. What does Hashem want now? What is my relationship with Hashem? What am I doing in my relationship with Hashem now? 24/7. We are not a religion like the Western religions. You live your life, and whatever. Sundays, Saturdays if you're an Adventist, You do your life and you have your religion. It's a nice hobby. And by the way, I know many people who became traditional and their father said to them, religion's very nice, but you don't have to do it full time. Like, there's other things, live your life. You want to have a religion, that's very nice. You want to have a religion, everybody should have a religion. Why not? It's like a stamp collection. Don't do it full time. Do it when you have a chance, when it's convenient, so that you do the religion. But full time? But that's what That's what Torah is. Torah in Judaism is not a religion. And don't let the Western world convince you otherwise, that it somehow should be related to or treated like a religion. It's not a religion, it's a life. We were granted our lives in order to be servants of Hashem. That's what we're here for. This is not a question of it being a religion that we do when we have convenience. And one of the ways to be reminded of that is through world disruption. Disruption sometimes happens in our own personal lives. Disruption happens on a more global level. And those are messages for us to recall that we need to rethink how it is that we define ourselves as servants of Hashem. So we're heading into this period, this very special period between Tisha B'Av and Rosh Hashanah. We're heading into that period where Hashem is comforting us, but don't go to sleep when He comforts you. Comfort does not mean everything's fine. Comfort means that the same one who gave you this destruction of the temple is the same one who loves you and cares about you and is rooting for you and wants you to hear the message, doesn't want to have to do another repeat of the messages that He's had to give. He wants you to hear the message, and so He sends disruption, which is the kindest way, the gentlest way of reminding us that we need to pause and reflect and review and remind ourselves that this is a 24/7 relationship. This is not simply, I live my life and I do the religion when it's convenient. So wish you a successful period of these 7 weeks between Tisha B'Av and Rosh Hashanah, so that we can come before the King on Rosh Hashanah and ask for a far more calm year. A far more calm and peaceful year, that we should not need all of these disruptions in order to wake up.